Guess what day it is? Yep, it's that magical time of the year when we bust this bad boy out, fire it up, and aerate the yard. So here's what needed to come together to make sure I could aerate my yard. Number one, I needed 50% green up. Check. Number two, I wanted to make sure those freezing temps really were behind us. I know I said that in the last video when I scalped the Bermuda down, but I wanted to double check and really make sure. So I looked at the 10-day forecast. It's out of the question. We're not facing freezing temps. We're good to go. Now, before I fire this up and get to work, let me touch on a few other things. The best time to aerate your yard is during the growing season. You want to make sure that your grass or your turf can bounce back from hitting it with a core aerator like this and fill in any open areas where those soil plugs are removed. Now, this is going to vary depending on where you live and the type of soil that you have, but down here in the south, especially here in Georgia, because we have that clay-based soil, we need to hit it at least once a year. If you've got a sandy-based soil like the folks down in Florida, you can do that once a year, but typically you would do that every other year. If you live in an area with an arid climate, we recommend aerating it twice a year because that's really going to enhance your turf growth and health. Another thing that you want to try to do is control the weeds in your yard before you aerate, which is why it's so important to put down a pre and post emergent. Aerating like this can spread weed seed throughout the yard in areas that you don't want. So like I said, you want to make sure to try and control those, get rid of them as much as possible before you core aerate. If you got a newly planted lawn, you want to wait at least a year before you core aerate like this because you want to make sure that those grass roots can really establish themselves before you punch on them with something like this. We also recommend that you aerate when the soil is moist but not saturated. The tines on the core aerator can penetrate more deeply on soil that is moist versus if it were just bone dry. And the reason we say not to aerate when the soil is just saturated, soil that's too wet's just gonna clog up those tines on your core aerator. So again, moist but not saturated. You want your lawn to absorb at least 1 inch of water either through rainfall or irrigation just before you aerate. So if you got rainfall predicted on a Monday and then clear blue skies and sunshine on a Tuesday, Tuesday's the day to get to it. One last thing before we fire this puppy up and really get to work, don't aerate during drought or high heat. If you do this during those types of conditions, you'll stress your lawn out by allowing the heat to dry out the soil. So just avoid that. Okay, I think it's time to fire it up and get to work. aerating is done, now it's time to spray the other half of my pre and post emergence. Now, as for my split application that I've been talking about ever since I did it, there's two main reasons I tackled it this way. One, I wanted to make sure I got a good even coverage. I wanted to make sure I hit everything. If I missed anything on my first application, this second application should really do a good job of taking care of it. And again, putting down something is better than nothing, waiting, aerating, and putting down a whole application, which is what I did last year, and it gave me some problems. Again, you put down a pre-emergent to give you a protective barrier. If you aerate after you put down that pre-emergent, you're breaking that barrier. Again, this was all part of my plan. I knew that I was gonna aerate at this point in the game, so that's why I put down half of what I normally put down to give my yard some sort of protective barrier. Now that I've aerated, I've broken that barrier, and that's why I'm gonna go through and put down the other half of what I normally put down, and again, put a protective barrier in my yard. And so yeah, I'm still putting down the same amount that I normally put down, I'm just spreading it out. What I normally put down, that gives me about 5 months worth of control. Doing it this way, splitting the application, it gives me 7 months. So in other words, I'm extending my control. We bought about 6 to 8 weeks with that first application, and I would add that it would probably go a little further than that. But with this second application, I'm getting that same 5 months of control plus the 6 to 8 weeks that I bought from the first application. So in other words, again, I'm extending my control. So I've aerated the front yard, I've mixed up my chemicals, time to spray. I think it's pretty obvious. You can tell where the Bermuda ends and the fescue begins. Like I briefly mentioned, my needs in my yard are going to be completely different from my neighbor's yard, and that's just right next door. Everybody's yard is going to be different. It's not a one-size-fits-all program. Everything that I'm doing here is going to be different for your yard. We just want to give you the tips and the tricks and the general direction that you need to head in, and the things that you should think about when trying to get your lawn program up and going for your turf. And just like that, we are done. Now you don't have to hear me say last half app anymore. You may have noticed that I did not touch the backyard with aerator, and that's on purpose and by design. I plan on aerating back there in the fall, when I also plan to top dress and overseed. But we'll get to that later on. So yeah, game on. We should be in full lawn game mode from this point going forward. From here, we're gonna fertilize, we're gonna mow, we're gonna maintain, we're gonna do all that kind of stuff. I keep saying that was my last application of post-emergence. I doubt that. I'm sure I'm gonna have to go through and spot spray when that time comes, when we're in the middle of the summer or so, but we'll tackle that when the problem arises. If you want to know more about the products that I use, my pre-emergent, my post-emergent, the backpack sprayer, that marking dye, I'll link all of that in the description box below, or click the eye icon at the top of the screen so you can go over to domyown.com and read more about all of those. And like I always say, if you have any other further questions, if I didn't touch on something or miss something, leave all that in the description box below, email the customer service staff, or pick up the phone. Give us a call. We still have more videos planned for you, so make sure to subscribe to the channel by clicking this button right here. You can click this playlist to see all the videos in the Do My Own Lawn Care series, and click this playlist to see all the videos in the Do My Own Gardening series. And just realize the hat's on backwards. Also, thanks for watching.